It's a smart investment decision to go with more efficient systems. We obviously always prioritize energy efficiency before electrification or renewable energy generation systems. It's much more efficient to use less energy
Sure.
than to make renewable energy. But the more you can do, if you can reduce and then you can electrify, and then you can make the electricity with renewable sources, all three of those things combined have the maximum chance of reducing carbon emissions overall.
As I was listening back to this conversation with Jacob Werner, one thing that really stuck with me was why focusing on lab designs is so important to him. These are the spaces where people are trying to cure cancer and developing renewable energy technology, building a better future for our planet and our people. And to do that, the buildings take a tremendous amount of energy and resources. And it's not because people are careless. It's because we have such a high bar for safety, airflow, precision. But that doesn't mean we can't make it better. And what I love about how Jacob approaches his lab design is how he subtly makes the easy choice the sustainable choice. So as you listen, focus on where Jacob talks about systems. He talks about air and energy and flow instead of individual behavior. And that's a really powerful reminder that climate action starts far upstream, much further than where we normally think about the decisions happening. Jacob Werner is an architect and principal at Ellenzweig, where he designs high-performance, all-electric research labs for universities and medical institutions. He's spent nearly 2 decades working at the intersection of laboratory design and sustainability, helping some of the most energy-intensive buildings rethink how they're built. This is my conversation with Jacob Werner.
I'm Jacob Werner, and I'm an architect with Ellenzweig here in Boston. And we specialize in designing science labs, primarily for colleges and universities. I'm also co-chair of the AIA 2030 Commitment, which is the AIA's program to help architects track and report their climate commitments toward net zero and reducing carbon emissions through the built environment.
And what's AIA?
The American Institute of Architects.
All right, so you help everybody report on sustainability within that organization.
Yeah, within the profession of architecture in the United States.
And when did you get into that?
How did I get into being an architect? That's a long story. I applied to a lot of different schools when I was applying to college, and it just sounded fun, and I got into a program at Cornell and I went there. I was just fascinated with it and the challenge of it and the combining of all different kinds of skills and working with people to kind of make their dreams come true. That all really appealed to me and still appeals to me. In terms of designing labs, that was never something that I was particularly interested in, primarily because I didn't realize that that was a career that one could go into.
Yeah, I didn't either.
So when I was in school, we designed all different kinds of things to try and prepare you to do any kind of job that you might get. And when I got out of school, I was working at a general architectural firm that did a lot of different kinds of things. I ended up doing a lot of work that was like design competitions and work in overseas. And I kind of burned out on it, and I was really looking for a change. And I found a firm that was focused more on doing projects in the United States and projects for colleges and universities, and they happen to also do science labs. And I just really fell in love with it. The thing that I like the most about it is being able to have a positive impact on society and on the people that I'm working for. First part of my career, I was doing hotels and resorts and kind of things that I might not ever even see built. I can actually drive to a lot of the buildings that I've worked on ever since changing career paths. And I really like being able to meet the people who are going to use the facility. And in terms of scientists, they often have really interesting projects that they're trying to accomplish. Some of them are actually trying to cure cancer or invent new battery technology or work on wind turbines or new materials. It's always fascinating to hear what the research is that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I can imagine. So how long have you been in architecting labs?
I've been doing labs about 20 years.
Wow. And then at what point did sustainability become part of your work? Or was it always there?
Well, actually, that's an interesting coincidence. So when I was working on labs at the beginning of that part of my career, I started to realize that they're really, really intensive buildings. They use
Mm.
a lot of energy, a lot of water, a lot of other resources. They generate a lot of trash. And so, good design, part of doing a really responsible design is trying to figure out how you can be the most efficient that you can and not waste resources. And so, we focused a lot at that time on what we called high performance design, which
Okay.
was meant to be about kind of optimizing and getting the most for your money, getting the most out of the project for what you were putting into it. It just so happens that all of that is really great prep work for sustainable design. And
Hmm.
so I started realizing that a lot of what I was doing would actually be enhanced by not only focusing on reducing energy and reducing resources, but also on trying to make it more beautiful or more fitting to the environment or using materials that were natural and had a kind of emotional connection to the people who were occupying the building.
Can you maybe take a step back and walk us through what goes into designing a lab? Like you get this new project, where do you even start? How does it go? How do you go about it?
Well, we start out by talking to the people who are wanting this building that we're building for them. So we're trying to figure out what their vision is in terms of the science that they want to achieve. Is it a lab where people are teaching students how to be future scientists or future doctors? Is it a lab where people are researching new materials or cures for cancer or other things like that? Is it a lab where a corporation is trying to design a new product? Even though lab seems pretty specialized, it's still a pretty broad
Yeah.
category of different kinds of facilities. So you meet with them and you try and figure out what their dream is for the building. And then you try to figure out how to make that possible in the most efficient way that you can. And the other thing that we always keep in mind is all this stuff changes over time. What somebody's
Mm.
researching today, they may have a different idea a year from now. And so we want the facility to be flexible for them to be able to change and seek out new directions as their research evolves or as their teaching evolves.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time on that future proofing.
And you said earlier that labs are much more energy and resource intensive than other kinds of buildings. Can you dive into that a little bit more? Like what's going on in these labs that makes them stand out?
Labs are very different than other kinds of buildings. Labs are really all about two things, basically. The first thing is trying to create an environment for experiments or activities.
Hmm.
So you're trying to create stable temperature, even and filtered air. You're trying to keep out too much sunlight. You're trying to keep everything kind of experimentally pure so that whatever the researcher or the student changes within the environment is what they're actually focusing on, not some random change of temperature or random fluctuation of dust.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
The other thing that we really focus on is safety, trying to make the building as safe as possible for whatever it is they're trying to do in there. And especially in research labs, people are working with nasty chemicals or lots of
Mm.
radiation, or they may actually be working with diseases. And so
Oh,
we're
yeah.
trying to separate the people from the experiment as much as possible. And that adds a lot of energy to the project. So, in terms of literally use of electricity, so you're
Right.
moving a lot of air, you're changing the temperature, you're filtering dust, you're doing whatever it is you need to make those two things happen.
And so you're taking into account all of that when you're initially designing the lab so that you can make it as efficient as possible. What are some of those decisions that you make in how you design it that might be different from a regular building?
So, office buildings are generally designed, for example, around the optimum use of space for people working at computers or working together in groups. So, you have things like individual private offices or workstations, cubicles, or
Hmm.
meeting rooms. Labs are generally designed for working with a process, working on chemicals or working with tissue samples or working with radiation or lasers in the case of physicists. And
Yeah.
so you're designing a kind of process that somebody can go through where you can keep everything controlled and you can keep everybody safe at the same time.
Right. And on the reduction side, what can you do from your position in designing the lab versus what the occupants of the lab do in just, not using as much electricity and turning things off? And what can you kind of build in?
Well, as the designer, we make it easier for the occupants to do all of that. We try to design the building in such a way that, for example, recycling is easier because there are recycling bins everywhere. In terms of energy, for a lab, we install fume hoods that have sashes that can close down, and so they use less energy when they're closed.
Hmm.
And that kind of extends to every aspect of the building. We specify high performance windows. We use better materials. We have more efficient heating and cooling systems. So, what we like to do is make it easier for the occupants to use less energy. And then, whatever energy they do use, design the building to be as efficient with that energy as possible.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was talking with somebody at Boston Children's who's in the Six Sigma department, and I was also looking at waste as a way to cut, and then also really just making it as convenient as possible so people aren't confused and it works within the workflow. So that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Do you ever have to persuade clients to go greener? What kind of arguments land in that scenario?
We try to make sustainable design and green design just good design. So we try to make solutions that are more sustainable, fit with the overall objectives of the project. We find that if sustainability is contrasted with another goal, the other goal tends to win.
Mm,
But when they're part and parcel of the same thing, they tend to survive. So we work really hard to lower the barriers to sustainability, efficient design, better use of materials, etc., and
yeah.
then make that all part of a package that's attractive overall as opposed to as a tack on or add on feature.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
If you tack it on, you can tear it off very easily.
Right. So it's just more about how you do business and how you build an efficient, safe, effective lab for these customers.
Yeah, people value natural materials, efficiency, effective.
Hmm.
Nobody wants to waste resources, right?
Yeah.
That's a waste of money too. So if you can design a building where, you're using wood strategically and people really appreciate wood, it has a resonance with human beings as a
Yeah.
natural material. You use that as an accent. You don't spend a lot of money on some expensive metal finish that feels cold and inhuman anyway.
Hmm.
Spend it on the things that actually have a sustainable benefit to people.
Mm, I love that. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about taking climate action at work that you think will stay with you throughout the rest of your life?
Oh, that's a really great question. I think a lot of people feel daunted by sustainability. It feels like either the things that I can do are so small, they're just like a drop in the bucket, or
Yeah.
taking real action is just so expensive or costly or difficult, or I don't know how to do it. People get kind of trapped between that, either I can't do enough or there's no way I can do that. There's this middle
Yeah.
ground. And so I think focusing on making things seem possible and that incremental steps are of value, and then making it possible to upgrade slightly or to move yourself slightly up the level of sustainability really helps. And then you find that if you can get people thinking in that way, they actually go farther than you might have thought
Mm,
they would have in the first place because you've given them a step 1 and a step 2 and a step 3, and they may decide that they wanna make their way to step 5. Maybe they don't get all the way to step 10, but they would've turned off at 1
yeah.
before, and you've made it possible for them to get half the way to their goal. So I think the more we can do that as a society, where we can realize that it's not all or nothing. There's
Mm-hmm.
benefit in doing as much as you can and just
Right.
keep pushing. I think that
Yeah.
would help.
That's great advice. Is there a story from your journey that you're thinking about as you were sharing that, like getting people to the next step?
Ah, you're asking really great questions. I mean, we have a lot of project stories. Another great project story is what we're doing at the University of Rhode Island. They asked us to do a master plan for their Narragansett Bay campus, which is inherently sustainable in a way. It's all about ocean engineering and
Mm,
oceanography. So the
cool.
oceans are really affected by climate change. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who are doing research on that campus are really interested in climate change and what they can do to better their own buildings and also their
Yeah.
own research. So we've been doing a series of different buildings. The Ocean Robotics Lab is under construction. We have an ocean engineering wave tank facility where they're going to
Wow.
study coastal erosion. That's in
Nice.
design. And the project that I'm working on right now is an ocean frontiers building, which is all about ocean and atmospheric chemistry, ocean geology, research
Wow.
into the impact of climate change in a way, and also other effects on the oceans. And so our building there, we're really focusing on how do we make it fit into the coastal Rhode Island environment? How do we make
Mm-hmm.
it feel like it's at home in a campus of buildings? And all within a kind of overall framework of improving the sustainability of the campus that the University of Rhode Island has there. And so we're focused on that building on geothermal as an energy source and
Mm-hmm.
how to make the building all electric as part of this kind of overall idea of revitalizing and renewing the campus. And there we're trying to make flexibility, adaptability, electrification, all kind of part of a good design package where
Mm-hmm.
what is a lab building of the next 10 or 15 years? It isn't, an old bunker made entirely out of concrete, which is actually the building they're replacing. It's
Okay.
now a new flexible building with these environmental and sustainable features.
Wow. That's really cool. It sounds like a really neat building and then also some really cool work that's going on there. At what point do you recommend labs like kind of start all over and do an overhaul, or is there work you can do with existing labs to make them more sustainable and efficient?
Oh, yeah. We can absolutely renovate and repurpose a building to make it more efficient. We're doing a project at Cornell University right now for plant science, where we're taking a beautiful old 120-year-old building and
Wow.
repurposing it for plant science. So, yeah, you can absolutely repurpose and reuse. And actually, it's really beneficial to keep as much of the existing structure as you can, because that's embodied carbon that's been
Mhm.
built into things.
So is that something you're looking at and measuring when you're architecting a new design, the embodied carbon? Oh,
Yep.
cool.
So for the University of Rhode Island on that Narragansett Bay campus, we're not only doing 3 new buildings, we're doing 2 renovations. And
Okay.
part of the renovation strategy is we looked at all the buildings on the campus and tried to decide what functions they could use in existing buildings and revitalize those buildings versus what functions needed to be built new. The other building for ocean engineering is a 100-meter long wave tank. A
Right.
300-foot long tank doesn't fit in any of their existing buildings, so we're building them a new building for that.
That makes sense. Yeah. If people are listening who might work in a lab, do you have any low-hanging fruit that they should be looking for to just try to at least look for opportunities to make it more sustainable?
There's a lot of things that an occupant of a lab can absolutely do to make their day-to-day life much more sustainable. If we're thinking about energy, the most significant thing that you can do is if you have a fume hood, keep it closed as much as you can because
Mm,
they use a lot more energy open than closed. There's a thing called a Shut the Sash campaign. Those are really,
okay.
really effective. You can also think about, again, on the energy front, turn off the lights when you leave the room. It seems crazy, but a lot of times labs, people don't know who's there or not there, what they're using. They don't know if
Mm,
they're okay to turn off the lights. So having a group meeting where you talk about, is it okay for me to turn the lights off,
Right.
is a really valid and great thing to do. Same thing with equipment. There's lots of equipment that people leave on in order to so that it stays at temperature and it doesn't go out
Mhm.
of calibration. That's great. If you need to do that, that's fine. But if there's a piece of equipment you're not using or that you don't know who owns it, you haven't seen anyone use it in weeks,
Right.
turn it off. Yes, you'll have to turn it back on and get it back up to temperature, but you won't be wasting all that energy in the weeks of nobody using it.
That makes sense.
Labs are a strange environment. There's a lot of reasons not to do things that you would normally do in your house, like turn off the lights.
Right, you don't
Um,
wanna mess up some big piece of research that's going on and unintentionally mess up the results.
but it's absolutely worth checking because you may find
Yeah.
that a lot of times you don't need to leave the lights on, and
Yeah.
they just get left on.
Are there resources where people can learn more?
Yeah, there's a great set of resources on the AIA's website. There's also
Okay.
great resources for lab-specific sustainability at the International Institute of Sustainable Labs website, another nonprofit that's near and dear to my heart. They have a
Hmm.
lot of great resources about all different kinds of topics for architects and engineers like myself, owners and operators like Chuck, and the general public about labs and sustainability.
We'll add some of those links in the show notes as well. Looking ahead, 10 to 20 years, what do you think green labs look like?
For a long time, labs were kind of bunker buildings that
Huh.
made out of concrete, maybe half buried in the ground. You'd walk by a lab and you couldn't see in it. You knew that something was going on in there, but it was kind of mysterious what it
Okay.
was. Over the course of my career, the last 25 years, we've really been working hard on making labs welcoming and transparent so you can see the activity that's going on in there,
Yeah.
making them actually not just physically accessible, but more mentally accessible. It isn't just the chemistry building, but it's about the Center for the Environment or the Wave Research Facility or something like that, giving them
Mhm.
more evocative names, designs that are more have a lobby, have a coffee shop, have
Mm.
classrooms, have meeting center, have bridges to other buildings or front onto a green space where people can actually sit and be. And all of
Yeah.
that is to try and make the lab experience more not only just accessible, but also inviting so that we can get
Yeah.
more people interested in science and
More human.
technology. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that all of us can participate more in science and technology. I would love to see that trend continue.
Mhm.
We're also seeing real interest in sustainable design, so these technical solutions like air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, but also things like the use of timber in the construction of the building. So, a lab building made out of wood, where there's actually wood columns and you can actually feel and experience nature in a different way. That's really
Wow.
starting to take off now, especially in the college and university buildings.
Yeah.
And you might say that's a little bit crazy. You're working with dangerous chemicals in a building. Why wouldn't you make it out of concrete or something super fire resistive? Wood is very fire resistive. It
Hmm.
it used to be that we made buildings out of heavy timber because they were fire resistive. It also is really important that people keep in mind that the impact on our environment, it happens from everywhere. Industry has a huge impact on our environment. Education has a huge impact on our
Yeah.
environment. And if you can keep that in everybody's minds and in their focus while they're doing their work, I think it has a real impact on not only how they feel about the world and what their contribution to the world is doing, but also how they feel as a person, right? So if
Mm.
you bury somebody in the basement in a bunker and tell them to work for 35 years on their career, that has a real impact on that human being. If you give them natural light and bring them up onto the green and they have a view and they have wood and they just feel better doing their work, it not only makes them feel better, but it also, I believe, makes their work better.
Yeah.
So They're able to do more. They're able to think more creatively, and they're able to keep the benefits to society front and center in their own minds. Well,
Yeah, benefits to society and that connection with nature and the planet and the home we all live on. Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, you're definitely making me interested in in labs more so than I ever was in the past. This is really, really great. I can tell you really love your work.
absolutely.
Jacob, this has been really great chatting. And is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think everybody has an ability to take action. And like I said, it isn't all or nothing, right? There's a whole
Mhm.
spectrum of contribution in there. Start with some contribution that you feel that you can make. And then if you feel confident that you can, keep increasing your contribution in your own way. Obviously I'm contributing as a designer and an architect. There are
Yeah.
other ways to contribute as a podcaster, for example.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody has something that they can contribute to making the positive change for our world and our climate.
I completely agree. Any job can be a climate job. Jacob, thank you again so much. This has been really fun. I appreciate you taking the time, and I think our listeners will learn a lot from you.
Thank you.
That was my conversation with Jacob Werner. What I keep thinking about is how clearly this connects to everything else we've heard in the series. Whether it comes from operating rooms or freezers or lab benches, the biggest wins come when we change the system. How can you think about building something that's going to outlast the amount of time that you're there at that company? Think about the bigger picture, the longer term. I'd love to hear what stood out to you. Please do leave a comment or reach out to me on Substack or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Louisa Henry, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job.